And joining us now, Graeme Smith, Afghanistan correspondent at the Globe and Mail, and the author of this week's Talking to the Taliban series. Graeme, welcome back.
It's good to see you again.
11 trips?
Going on 13.
Going on 13 now, trips to Afghanistan, my goodness. Well, you just returned from Kandahar, where you and your colleagues at the Globe conducted, I guess what you called a non-scientific survey of 42 Taliban fighters that you interviewed. Why the survey?
Well, because I was finding it personally dangerous to visit with the Taliban myself. I have met with the insurgents in Quetta and Kandahar, but they started joking with me, "Oh, no, don't worry, we won't kill you, we'll just kidnap you." And that sense of humor didn't give me much comfort when so many journalists were being kidnapped.
But they were being funny, right? They were attempting to be funny?
I think they were being funny.
You think they were? How were you, a Western journalist, and not just a Western journalist, but a Western journalist from a country that's got troops there and is killing them, able to get so close to frontline Taliban fighters?
By proxy. We hired a researcher, we paid him $20 per interview, and we gave him a small video recorder, and he went out into the fields and did the work himself.
And give us the picture of the sort of average Taliban that you had interviewed.
What we found was that a lot of these guys belong to tribes that are alienated from the central government. They're mostly young men in their late teens and early 20s. A lot of them have had their poppy fields eradicated because the vast majority of them are involved in the illegal opium industry, and so they've come under, that industry has come under direct attack from the government. A surprising number of them had also had relatives who were bombed, that died in airstrikes. So, those are some of the things we found.
Do they hate us as a result of all of that?
Yeah, they hate us, and it's hard to tell exactly why, because they use the language of radical Islam. They say they want to expel all the non-Muslims from Afghanistan, but beneath that there are also some bread and butter issues. There's some basic economic reasons why they would want us out as well. So it's hard to distinguish one from the other.
So if, for example, all the Canadian troops left tomorrow, there's no reason to assume that they'd love us anymore?
Well, yeah, that's right. But some of them actually say that if there were no non-Muslims in Afghanistan, then they would not be attacking the Karzai government, which was a surprising result.
Did your survey reveal the presence of any fighters from outside Afghanistan, maybe from Arab countries, for example?
I think if we'd done the same survey in eastern Afghanistan, where the insurgency is different, we might have found some foreign fighters. But in the south, where the Canadians are fighting, we didn't see any foreign fighters in the sample. The same researcher who we've been working with for quite some time has personally seen al-Qaeda fighters in a place called Zabul province, a little further east from Kandahar. So they do exist, and they are out there, but they are very, very rare.
When you were here on this program in January, you described the conflict in Afghanistan as a war between tribes settling old scores and fighting for power. Now you've done this survey. Does the survey back up what you were telling us a few months ago?
Well, I had a bit of an advantage because when I spoke to you last time, I was still in the middle of doing the survey, and I'd already seen some of the results.
Okay,
so I cheated a little bit. I'm sorry for that.
But you're entitled.
But yeah, the tribes that we found out there fighting the Canadians overwhelmingly came from outside of what's called the Zirak Durrani branch of the Pushtun ethnic group, and so. These are people who are largely disenfranchised. If you look at people in power in Kandahar, a lot of them belong to just three tribes, the Papalsai, the Badakhsai, and the Alakozai. And the other tribes obviously feel jealous of that power, and no one's ever been defeated at the ballot box in Afghanistan. They don't know how to express that discontent. And so the protest vote becomes fighting.
You've put it in tribal terms. I think people over on this side of the world tend to see it in religious terms. They see the Taliban as a religious movement. How much does religion motivate the frontline Taliban fighter, at least insofar as your survey was able to pick up?
Well, what's interesting is both sides of the war want you to see it that way. The Taliban want to describe it as a religious war because religion is something that can unify all the tribes, and it gives a justification for fighting. And the Karzai government wants to see it in the same way as well. They want to see this as a war against terrorism, a war against religious extremists who are so awful that there can be no compromise with them and that you must fight them. But I think underneath that, there is actually a tribal dynamic happening here that reflects some of the ancient feuds that have been happening in Afghanistan. But one of the things that is really important to understand about that is that this is not part of a tribal squabble that will go on forever and has gone on forever, because there have been vast swaths of Afghan history where the tribes have been at peace. So it reflects an ancient animosity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's hopeless.
But just to pursue the notion that the Karzai government's putting forward, which is that the Taliban are part of this global war on terror, do the Taliban see themselves that way?
No, they don't.
They don't as part of the global jihad? They don't see themselves that way?
Well, there were some of the Taliban in our survey, and you can go online and see all the interviews for yourself. And as you do that, you'll see that some of them declare war on infidels wherever they happen to be. One described this as a world war. But that was the vast minority, that the majority of the Taliban said that their aims are within the geographic boundary of Afghanistan. And so that's really interesting, that they see themselves as trying to change things within Afghanistan and not anywhere else in the world.
Well, it's also interesting insofar as there are obviously plenty of politicians in the West who see them as simply the Afghanistan chapter of the global war on terror. But you're suggesting that that's probably not an accurate depiction of what's going on.
Yeah, we're often told that if we don't fight them in Kandahar, that we'll have to fight them
over
in
here.
Canada. Yeah, and I think that's simply not the case, because when we surveyed them and asked them, well, okay, where is Canada? We give them a multiple choice question. Is it north, south, east, or west of the United States? Only 1 out of 42 guessed correctly, so it's much worse than random chance. Now, that being said, the Taliban do have links with Al-Qaeda, I think. My other reporting has shown that. And so you have to look at, okay, yeah, we won't be fighting the Taliban in Canada at any time, but there are links with people who have more global ambitions.
Are you concerned, I know you're not a pollster, but are you concerned that, you've already told us this is a non-scientific study. Having said that, you've done 42 fascinating interviews and got some information that nobody else in this country's ever got before. But are you worried that this is not a adequately representative sentiment of the Taliban people as a whole?
We spread it out over 5 different districts of Kandahar, and we dealt with different Taliban commanders to get access to these different places. So we did try to vary the sample a little bit. But yeah, you're right, it's a horribly unscientific exercise. I don't think there's any pollster in the world that would base a survey off of 42 interviews with anybody. It's a small taste of insurgent opinion.
Sure.
It has never been done before, and just as I've been writing these stories in the newspaper, academics from 5 different countries have contacted me and asked for my raw material. People from within the military have asked for my raw material.
Do you give it to them?
Of course I do, yeah.
To the military as well?
Because it's freely available online.
Okay.
We put absolutely all of our raw interviews up online. All of the English transcripts, everything is there for anyone who wants to see, including the military.
Did the people who were talking to you know that what they were saying might eventually be used by the people commanding the troops that were out there designed to kill them?
They knew they were talking to a journalist, and so they knew that what they were saying was public.
Mullah Omar is, I guess, nominally their leader. How loyal are they to him?
What was interesting in the survey was that I asked my researcher, can you go out and say, if the foreigners leave, would you accept a government without Mullah Omar? And the look in his eyes when I first suggested that was fear, because he thought that if he said that to the average insurgent, that the insurgent might kill him or might harm him in some way. And you can see in the first 6 or so interviews that are online, he didn't ask the question at all because he was wary of it. But we did eventually persuade him to start asking the question. And when he did, the result was surprising, because a large number of them said, we don't really mind who's the leader of Afghanistan, as long as he's a good Muslim and we have Muslim laws in Afghanistan.
That's
so
probably not something Mullah Omar would like to get out there.
Well, in a way, it might mean that the Taliban are scarier than we think, because some people have talked about this as a franchise expansion model of the Taliban. That there are people now joining the insurgency who don't have any particular allegiance to the sort of Taliban headquarters per se, and they're fighting for their own reasons.
Well, explore that with me a little, if you would. What did they tell you were the primary reasons why they were out there fighting in the first place?
If you ask just the bald question, why are you fighting? Nearly all of them will say, this is a religious war. We're fighting to remove the non-Muslims from Afghanistan. But then underneath that, I think you start to have to look at the answers that they gave to, for instance, the question we asked about poppy. The vast majority of the money that comes into Afghanistan is from the illegal opium business. Sure. They outbid the Canadians, they outbid the Americans. The drug dealers are the single biggest source of income for any rural Afghan. And so they're going to protect that source of income. And more than half of the people that we asked, or who answered the question, said the government has come and tried to eradicate my opium fields.
So the knee-jerk answer is it's about religion, but you think once you scrape a bit below the surface, it's actually an economic argument they're making.
I think it's a bit of both.
So what does it say about our current policy to eradicate the poppy fields?
Well, the Jones-Pickering report, which was a U.S. Study that came out earlier this year, contained an interesting buzzword that you started to hear a little bit more in academic circles called sequencing. Some people have started to say, well, maybe the war on drugs is a good thing, and we should be trying to bring a legitimate economy to Afghanistan, but maybe we should sequence it. Maybe we should establish control over the country and then try to change the economy, and not try to do it at the same time as we're fighting the war on terror and the insurgency. Because really, there are 3 wars being fought at the same time in Afghanistan now. The war on terror, the war on the Taliban, and the war on drugs. And some people are saying these are too many wars to fight at the same time. And in fact, that prosecuting the war on drugs at the ground level against your average poor farmer is really counterproductive. Now, interdiction against drug dealers and going after some of the high-level figures in Afghanistan who are involved in the drug trade, that's a different thing. But going after the poppy farmers, you could stop doing that.
So at the end of the day, you know, you've looked at all of the information, you've seen the survey results come in. What is it that you think these people want at the end of the day?
You know, in some cases, I don't know if they have a very clear idea. Because when they say, we want a Muslim president and we want Islamic law in Afghanistan, well, they have a Muslim president.
They kind of have that, don't they?
Exactly. They have Islamic laws. And so it's not entirely clear, but some of the most interesting things were when they started talking off of my list of questions, when they just started speaking without particular prompting. And they spontaneously, a couple of them started talking about alcohol, because alcohol has started to become available in Afghanistan for the first time in a long time. You can buy it surreptitiously on the streets. They started talking about cinemas and movies, because there's now sort of an underground black market trade in pornography and Bollywood movies and so forth in Afghanistan. And they also talked about licentiousness with women, which for the Taliban, who banned women from working, could just mean women at work. So some of these signs of modernity clearly make them very uneasy. And I often got the impression watching all of these videos that that these guys are really just reacting against the outside world, reacting against modernity.
Any of them speak English?
No.
So you're doing all of this in second language and translating it?
It was all in Pashto. We did a first draft translation so that I could get some quick information. And then, of course, we did a really professional word-by-word transcript so that we could post the information online and make it freely available to anybody.
Have any of them had any contact with Canadian troops?
Yeah, a lot of them told stories about fighting the Canadian troops, in fact. A few of them actually expressed respect for the Canadians in battle, but most of them said that the Canadians are cowards, and that if it weren't for the airplanes and all of their sophisticated technology, that they could beat them.
They said the Canadian troops were cowards?
That's what they claimed.
Because
yeah.
they've got planes in the sky?
Because they rely on bombs instead of fighting face-to-face.
But there are Canadians who are down there fighting face-to-face. They
Absolutely,
must know that.
Absolutely. I mean, the stories that the Taliban tell have to be taken with a grain of salt. I mean, they will tell stories of their own glory in battle in the same way that anybody would, in the same way that the Canadian troops sometimes embroider their own tales of heroism.
We know America has been nicknamed the Great Satan, and Israel, I guess, has been nicknamed the Little Satan. Do they have a nickname for us?
No. In fact, I mean, their understanding of Canada is so sketchy. You know, we asked them, who is Stephen Harper? None of them knew Stephen Harper. None of them had any idea who this person was. And some of the ways that they reacted to that, who is gra, pla, pla, made it clear that they had never heard this word before. Some of them actually had the same reaction to George Bush. You asked them, who is George Bush? And several of them had no idea.
Didn't know who the President of the United States was?
Most of them did have an idea. I mean, they would say he's the king of the infidels, or he is the man who is organizing all of the infidels to invade Afghanistan. But yeah, a few of them just stared blankly into the camera when asked that question.
Did you ask them about 9/11?
No, we didn't. But what was interesting when they give their account of history, you know, they talk about how the infidels came to Afghanistan and decided to fight Afghanistan, in their words. None of them made any reference to 9/11, and none of them made any reference to many of the other things that sort of muddy their claims to superiority. You know, they don't talk about how hundreds and hundreds of civilians have been killed by the Taliban, and you know, in suicide bombings and all kinds of other incidents. They don't talk about the Afghan drug addicts, you know, who are a result of their opium industry. So there are a lot of things they left out of their view of the world.
Sure. Graeme, in our last minute here, you've done the survey. You've had this look at a community that very few people in the world have managed to get a good close-up look at. What's the one thing that kind of struck you the most after it's all said and done?
You know, what's interesting is that I think we don't understand very well that what Canadians are fighting in Afghanistan is often just ignorance. You know, people who are deeply, deeply xenophobic. And I've been shot at by the Taliban. I was with the Canadian troops. I've been shot at, bombed, rocketed, mortared. You know, my convoy was hit by a suicide bomber. And when you're in these intense situations, it's very easy to think that your enemy is someone who's crafty and intelligent. And it's amazing to put a video camera in their faces and understand that these are very simple people.
Graeme, it's great to see you again. As always, welcome home. Safe trip next time you go over, which is when?
Very soon, in a couple of weeks.
Amazing. Be well on the trail. Thanks so much.
Thank you.